Thy word is a lamp unto my feet, and a light unto my path.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us today as we continue our reading and reflecting in the Psalms. Today I'll be reading Psalm 83, and I'll be reading from the New American Standard. A Psalm of Asaph. O God, do not remain quiet, do not be silent, and O God, do not be still. For behold, your enemies make an uproar, and those who hate you have exalted themselves. They make shrewd plans against your people, and conspire together against your treasured ones. They have said, Come and let us wipe them out as a nation, that the name of Israel be remembered no more. For they have conspired together with one mind. Against you they make a covenant. The tents of Edom and the Ishmaelites, Moab and the Hagrites, Gebal and Ammon and Amalek, Philistia with the inhabitants of Tyre, Assyria also has joined with them. They have become a help to the children of Lot. Deal with them, as with Midian, as with Sisera, and Jabin at the torrent of Kishon, who were destroyed at Endor, who became as dung for the ground. Make their nobles like Oreb and Zeb, and all their princes like Zebah and Zalmunna, who said, Let us possess for ourselves the pastures of God. O my God, make them like the whirling dust, like chaff before the wind, like fire that burns the forest, and like a flame that sets the mountains on fire. So pursue them with your tempest, and terrify them with your storm. Fill their faces with dishonor, that they may seek your name, O Lord. Let them be ashamed and dismayed forever, and let them be humiliated and perish, that they may know that you alone, whose name is the Lord, are the most high over all the earth. So we have in this psalm a cry from the psalmist who is crying out to God, saying, God, please do not remain silent. Don't be quiet. Don't be silent in the face of these enemies who are plotting against your people. But we see this is really a cry from the psalmist saying that the world is against Israel. The world is against God's people. And the psalmist is crying for God to bring about judgment upon these enemies of God's people. And the psalmist in verses 9 through 12 actually calls upon the history of Israel, calls upon the history of Israel, the children of Israel, to remember their own history, how God had routed Israel's enemies in the past. And because of God's faithfulness, God's might, God's justice that he had shown in the past, the children of Israel can have confidence even in the perceived silence of God now, because they know that God will bring judgment upon the enemies of his people. And so in verses 13 through following, we see the end result of those enemies, of those who would plot against the Lord and against his people. That they will be like whirling dust, they will be like chaff, that they will be dismayed. And what I find is really interesting is verse 16. It says, Fill their faces with dishonor, that they may seek your name, O Lord. One of the important things for us to remember, one of the things that we learn about God, is that even when God brings judgment upon people, there is still a chance for them to turn to the Lord, to turn and seek the Lord and follow after him. So even in judgment, there is a hope, but it's important to keep our hearts at a point where when trial, when judgment comes upon us, that we don't turn away from the Lord, but instead we realize that suffering and pain are megaphones by which God is crying out to us to turn to him. And so I hope that as you go through your week this week, that you'll remember that God, even though he may appear to be silent to the world, we know that he is alive, he speaks to us through his word, and that we should trust in him and follow after him.